start asking questions. Thank you.
Where's the camera? Yes, sir.
Was any of the DNA evidence from any of the 9/11 sites, the analysis of it, was it ever put into the public realm?
That's a very good question. What we found out is that the recovery of bodies, for example, where the most bodies were recovered in the 9/11 saga happened in Shanksville. And as I said, the recovery was being done in another site than what we were told. And those body parts were being picked up by FBI agents only, sent to Dover Air Force Base where they were being analyzed by FBI agents only. And what we now know is that the Dover mortuary at Air Force Base Dover was basically any body parts that they could not identify were being cremated and put into the landfill. So we have a very serious situation there. And so, no, what body parts that were not identified were just cremated and put in a landfill.
The bodies of the people who jumped from the towers,
Oh, that's different. Those
were they get autopsies? Were they?
no, with the people that jumped from the towers, there was not much left. It was terrible. They fell from such a distance, such a height. There was really nothing left. But it was about 250 people at least. But DNA analysis of those, I don't know about.
What offices were in building number 7?
Okay.
And we never heard about it.
Yeah, thank you. Building 7 was mostly federal agencies like CIA, IRS, criminal investigations. Building 7 was owned by Larry Silverstein, and the main tenants were basically U.S. government.
Were there any deaths in building 7?
Any what?
Were they all, building 7, were they all evacuated before it came down? So there were no official deaths?
Yeah, Building 7 and also Building 6 were evacuated as soon as Building 1 was hit, basically. But there were people in Building 7. And as you see from videotapes on YouTube, you see that there were people that came out of Building 7, workers, just before it fell down, said, people better get back, that building's coming down, it's gonna come down. So there were people in there who had done demolition preparation, and the building was pulled down. And there were other high-level people from New York City who were actually sometimes trapped in that building at some point, who were evacuated. That's in the book, but yeah, there were people in there, but they got out. They got out.
One of those people was Barry Jennings. Look up Barry Jennings or read about it in Mr. Bollyn's book. Any other questions? Yes.
There was mention about election rigging and the electronics, and since we got an election coming up, give us more details on what to expect.
Okay. Well, I can tell you, they've really made elections in this country a circus. The circus goes on for 2 years. But what the most important thing about, in 2000, I started doing research. I was going to be an election judge, and I started doing research about electronic voting machines.
Yeah.
And electronic voting machines are the machine that they use to steal our elections. Basically, the overwhelming majority of votes in this country are counted by machine. There's only a very few number of counties that do hand-counted ballots anymore, paper ballots counted by hand. This is the essence of a democratic election. If the citizens are not allowed to count their votes at the polling place in the presence of other citizens and the press, you do not have a transparent election. And what I discovered in 2000 was that there was a criminal element that was controlling the election machines in Chicago, Cook County, where I'm from. But now that it's all across the country. And so in this way, they steal our election. They select for us first, they select for us the people who will be the candidates. Then they create the media circus. And then they control the actual election itself. So the most important thing to understand is that our political predicament in this country is very acute. We do not have democratic elections. We do not have a free press. We are no longer living in a democratic republic.
That's right.
And that's important to understand. So that means that when people understand that, that's why so many people are run away from 9/11 truth, because when you understand 9/11 truth, you are almost compelled to take some sort of action, like Phil Restino, like the Veterans for Peace here, like all of you. It's not something you can just kick back and go home and watch TV and think everything's going to be okay. It's not going to get better until there's a change. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next? Kat, John? This mic can't reach you. You have to come meet me halfway.
Perhaps DOD had the answer for the 90-minute stand down on the Air Force reacting. The second part of that is you talked about the thermite penetrating into the towers. How did they get that aboard three different airline planes?
That's a very good question. I would point you to the second chapter of my book, Solving 9/11, because I talk about that chapter's called The Planes of 9/11. And in that chapter, I describe how Israel, for years, in Florida, has been doing conversions of Boeing 767s. So they've taken these Boeing 767 tankers and they convert them back and forth so that the plane can serve as a tanker in wartime and then go back to being either a cargo or passenger plane in peacetime. And they're very good at that. And they were doing that at a little company in Miami called Commodore at the Miami airport. And now the same company, the same operation has moved up to Rome, New York, to the former Griffiths Air Force Base. But what you ask is, how did they do that? Because I'll tell you, it's basically an operation in which there was like a stage magician, sleight of hand, or we call it in America the old switcheroo. The planes that were supposed to be Flight 175 and Flight 11, those planes with the passengers went someplace else, landed someplace else. The passengers were disembarked and put on another plane. The planes that struck the towers were obviously not Flight 175 or Flight 11. As we see that, Flight 93 crashed in the woods someplace, were shot down, and we don't know what hit the Pentagon. But in any case, those Flight 175 and Flight 111 were not the planes that hit the South Tower or the North Tower. There was a switcheroo. And this is very close to something called Operation Northwoods. It was a false flag operation dreamt up by Lemnitzer back in 1962, in which an American passenger plane would appear to be shot down over Cuba or near Cuba. And then Cuba would be blamed when in fact the plane that got shot down was a drone. My opinion is that the planes that struck the South Tower and the North Tower were most likely 767 cargo tankers that had been converted into drones, and that they carried the missile pod on the bottom. Flight 175, Flight 11 went someplace else.
Did they have people in them?
Probably not. Unless maybe some people have already dead.
Thank you. Kathy?
I'd just like to thank you for coming and talking to us today, Christopher, in your way. I have a question, two-pronged. Do you really, in reality, believe that this group will ever come to justice? You do believe that? That they'll be prosecuted and have to account for all of what's been going on for many, many years? You do think they will eventually?
I can answer that.
I have one more question.
Okay. That's the question that's up to us. It's up to us. Are we going to, live in our country, in our great country? I tell you that the people all around the world look up to America. They consider America to be the beacon of freedom and hope for the whole world. And if Americans don't stand up for ourselves, if we don't do it, nobody's going to do it for us. I'm often invited to go to places like Iran or here or there and talk. I don't do that because the Iranians are not going to solve 9/11 for us. The audience I want to reach is the American people. When enough people in this country realize the gravity of the situation and the level of deception, then, when enough people understand that, there will be a change. Believe me, you don't have to have 90% of the population. Any revolution doesn't require 90%. The U.S. Revolution was fought with a small minority of people who were involved. Most of the people were loyalists, went back to Canada, went to Brazil, went to the Caribbean. They didn't want any part of it. But we're in a situation now where it requires a number of people in this country of significant brains, moral courage, and wherewithal to understand the deception and to do something about it, to get organized and do something about it. Believe me, the deck is stacked against us. I mean, they have the power, they have the government, they have the media. And the media is the most powerful thing they have, because the media is what numbs the minds of all of our comrades here. This is why we only have maybe 50 people here or so, rather than 500. Because the media is controlling how we think about this whole thing. We've been lulled into complacency. Everything is going to be okay when we see that the country's going to hell in a handbasket. So when enough people understand, then we have a chance. But only when we take the initiative. Next question. You got another question?
Have you had any threats on your life?
Well, I live in Sweden now for the last 5 years because I was attacked by undercover police at my house, and I was prosecuted, malicious prosecution, by undercover cops who didn't identify themselves. And they would have put me in Cook County Jail probably. The case was, the trial was so corrupt that they would have put me in that Cook County Jail in Chicago where probably nothing good would have happened to me. And I certainly wouldn't put my family in that situation where they should lose their father and their husband for a year. So, and that's about the worst thing that happened to me. You know, that's what compelled me to relocate to Europe. But, you know, it's like Sam Houston said, do right and risk the consequences. And what I'm doing, I think, is the right thing to do. I'm trying to share the fruits of my research with the American public. That's all.
One more comment.
Just a comment?
Real
Keep it
quick.
short, keep it
You
short.
have done a lot of research. This is amazing. Thank you again.
Oh, thank you.
My only question is, I do believe that there possibly was a switch, and I've seen a movie once made too. The only part was, if there was made a switch, people were put on different aircraft. Do you think that they eventually got home and it was told to shut up and paid off, or do you think they were eliminated, which I believe happened in the movie?
Yeah, my basic opinion is that they were the good ones, the good, honest people, like Ellen Mariani's husband, were probably put on a plane or another, one or two planes, and that was in fact the plane that was shot down over Shanksville, which is why that debris field was left completely secret from the American public, and why there were so many unidentified bodies in that debris field, which was then taken to Dover Air Force Base, those body parts, and not identified. And that's what I think happened. And that Flight 93, I believe, probably did in fact land in Cleveland. And that what you have to understand is in the book, it's a little bit detailed, but there were several planes that landed in Cleveland Air Force Base after the airport was shut by the government. And everybody was sent home. Nobody was allowed in the airport. But the Delta flight landed there, and Flight 93 landed there, and the people were taken into the NASA facility, John Glenn facility there, and they were interrogated by FBI agents. I believe that was sort of the culling process, where certain people were put on the plane and certain people went home. Thank you.
We still have time. Let's take advantage of, do you mind if someone who hasn't asked goes?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Please come up, folks. Take advantage of this.
I just, a couple of questions. The lady asked about your security, but you mentioned somebody that fled to Argentina for their life. I would think that you're still in danger around, and I just wonder, you know, I admire your courage, and I drove all the way over here from Tampa, having heard about your presentation today, and I'm just so very thankful that there's somebody with your kind of courage that's doing what you're doing, and I want to thank you for that. And then one little detail about, I think it was your webpage that said that the Jewish employees at 911 or at the towers were notified ahead of time. How did you come across that information? Is that accurate, or is that what?
Okay. That's a very important point that needs to be clarified. I'll take the second point first. It's 4,000 Israelis had contacted the foreign ministry in Israel on 9/11, asking for information about their loved ones who were thought to have been in the area of the World Trade Center or the Pentagon on 9/11. And that was reported in the Jerusalem Post online on September 12th. So there were 4,000 Israelis who were thought to have been in the area. That, in conjunction with the Israeli instant messaging service called Bollyn, in which several hours before 9/11 happened, before the first plane struck, there were messages sent on this platform, this application, which was universal in applications that it could reach. Obviously, a message was sent in Hebrew that was precise to the minute, that warned of some catastrophe occurring at the World Trade Center complex. And as the vice president of the company, Alex Diamandis, told the Israeli press, it was precise to the minute. Now, I have said that it appears there were 4 Israelis died in the World Trade Center. 4 out of expected 4,000. So I just kind of have assumed that some of them got the message. The ones that didn't show up that day, that saved their skins, got the message not to go to work that day. Now when people confuse Jew for Israeli, that's a very important distinction to make. You have to understand, we're not talking about American Jews, we're talking about Israelis who are expected to be at the World Trade Center complex. And they probably had been warned through this Odigo platform, this Odigo application, with messages that were sent out to people that had Israeli nationality and spoke Hebrew. So if you were an Israeli and spoke Hebrew, you got this message. If you're an American Jew, you don't read Hebrew, you don't understand that. You went to work. But there were several people, like there was that comedian, Al Franken. Yeah, Al Franken, who's now in Congress.
Yeah.
He wrote a book, Liars, Those Damn Liars and More Liars, something like that, in which he says, to tell you the honest truth, I got the Jew call, he says. And he says he was contacted by Mayor Koch. And he did not go to work that day. His office was in the World Trade Center. Some people said, oh, don't you understand? He's a joker, he's a satirist. Well, I don't know. He says he's telling the truth. Is he a liar too? I don't know. But it's Israelis. The important distinction to understand, it was Israelis, 4,000 Israelis. Thank you.
I have 2 quick questions. One is, what do you know about like the fake phone calls that supposedly people made with their cell phones, and that was impossible?
Yeah.
And then second one, I was going to ask you your take on the whole. You mentioned the Rita Katz fake ISIS videos, and you mentioned the Yidden strategy or whatever it's called, the balkanization, and you think like that's like the main point of bringing in all of these refugees across Europe to create the balkanization of Europe to have a good enemy for them to point at when the economy crashes.
Well, I live in Europe, and I've seen a lot of this refugee stuff. I've been to one refugee camp in Germany. I was at one in Tutzing, Germany, south of Munich, and all the refugees that I talked to, there were some Afghans there, but they were not Syrians, and they were primarily young men, and some of them were from places like Pakistan and Senegal, and from countries that are not even involved in war. And so somebody has opened up the door to Europe and said, let the flow begin. And this is very similar to the Soviet strategy that in the Soviet Union, they wanted to weaken the national fabric of all those countries in the Soviet Union by having this kind of mass transborder immigration. And that they would create a Soviet people, there would be Soviet people rather than Estonians and Latvians, Lithuanians, what have you. This strategy is part of the whole ongoing war. Basically, they want to create tension between the West and Islam, and the third world Islamic countries and the countries of the Middle East. They want to foment sectarianism on a huge level. They want to make Europeans extremely uneasy about Islam. And at the same time, they want to create more havoc, more chaos, weaken the moral, Europeans will say, oh, we have to be good Germans and take these people in. But now, in Sweden, last summer, there were 2,000 Syrians coming in every day. In 1 week, Sweden's a small country. There were 20,000 people came into Sweden. And it's, I can just point to some very weird stuff's going on. I think it was the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal had some people at the Vienna airport or Vienna train station talking to these refugees with a person who spoke fluent Arabic. And they found that these people who were calling themselves Syrians, for example, they found one group, they said, well, you sound like North Africans. Yeah, that's right. We're Algerians, actually, and we have drug convictions back in Algeria, so we're coming in now. So it's like, it's not all Syrian refugees at all. If you look at the flows coming in through the Balkans, 90% young men between the ages of like 18 and 22. They're not all refugees. They're not all war refugees. So there is a policy to weaken Europe and to cause more tension. strategic tension. That's what they always want. They want to keep us tense. They want to keep us afraid. Now, I just want to say one thing in parting is that if you come to a website or you come to some media source that makes you feel anxious, if you feel your fear buttons are being pushed by everything in that article, put a yellow flag by that. That is an agency. That is somebody who's trying to make you afraid. And they want you to be afraid for a reason. Because if people are afraid, they won't do anything. See, what I really want to do is make people get over those fears. Realize that if anybody should be afraid, I should be afraid. Don't be afraid. Take action, be bold, be like Phil, be like all you guys. Stand up for America.
Okay, this isn't really a question, but I just wanted to bring to mind about the other September 11th that we had, that we were complicit in. And that was like when it was a coup that took out President Allende and put in Pinochet. Tens of thousands of people were massacred, and pretty much, I think we had something to do with that too.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, it's okay. That's a good comment.
Thank you. Yes, The Trials of Henry Kissinger is a good documentary to catch that. Here you go.
You said that the planes were probably drones.
Yeah.
Okay, so Flight 93, those heroes that said, let's roll, and they stormed the cockpit and tried to get control but failed, and the plane crashed anyway. What happened to all those people? Were they actors, or what really went on there?
Yeah, I think that, like the previous question, I have forgotten that question about the telephone calls and things. A lot of this information comes to us through telephone calls that were not possible, could not have been made. So it indicates that somebody was creating these bits of information that were to bring us to a certain conclusion that there had been passengers had a mutiny and taken over the plane, and when in fact that's not what happened. In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, I've been there several times. There was some very strange stuff going on. One lady saw what appears to have been a A-10 Warthog flying in circles around before anything happened. And she was in her car, in her van, it's a very woodsy area, and she saw that thunderbolt go right over her head, and there was a tremendous boom. And she assumed the plane had crashed. But that boom happened exactly where that hole is in the ground. So that A-10 Warthog probably just shot a missile in the ground to give the impression that that's where the plane crashed. When over there you have, so the whole thing about Shanksville, the whole thing about Flight 93 is all a big Hollywood facade. It's all been crafted and to fit into this narrative. And maybe people feel good about that narrative that these bold American guys took over the plane. But that's not what happened in Flight 93. It's all a big, they say German Schauspiel. It's a big, like an inscenation. We've been given this kind of scene, like a movie theater, like a Hollywood production. That's what these guys said. These German guys, one of the first German guys I spoke to, he was a head of the former German intelligence. He said, it's a Hollywood production. It's a Hollywood production.
Thank you.
Is there the equivalent of you and your effort with 9/11 for 7/7 and the Spanish, the train bombings? And if you were asked to speak here in America before an Israeli-American audience who might agree with you, or go to Israel, would you feel safe enough to do those?
I would definitely speak to Jewish groups or Israeli groups in this country. I would not go to Israel. I would not go to Israel anymore. I haven't gone to Israel since 1991, I think it was. And every time I left in the last 10 years prior to that, I would take my sandals and knock the dirt off when I got on the boat. It got so bad in Israel. The situation got so bad, so oppressive, that I wouldn't go back there because it's just there's nothing you can do there. And I was the last time in Gaza with the Archbishop of the United States Episcopalian Church, the presiding Archbishop, I think his name was Browning. And I led those guys there, some journalists, and we went to Gaza together. And he told me, when you go back to America, talk to your congregation, talk to the people about what you've seen here in Gaza. But when I got back to Santa Cruz, I found that it was almost impossible for me to speak, even in my own church or at the University of California. I came back with photographs from all over Gaza and the West Bank. Incredible, 3 photographers we were. And when we were paid, we were given the money to do this trip. by the University of California, Santa Cruz, by various groups within there. And when we wanted to put our pictures up in the library, the Jewish organization said, you can put the pictures up, but no captions. No captions are allowed. And it's so like, the whole discussion of Israel and Palestine has been dominated by one side of the coin. The Israeli side is the only side we're allowed to hear. But I would speak to Israelis. I have not been invited to speak to any Israeli groups, but American Jewish groups are the ones I really want to reach. They're Americans. And American Jews are in a very very bad pickle, because they are just doubly deceived. If non-Jewish Americans, we're deceived big time, but Jewish Americans are doubly deceived, because they're deceived about what they are told are their obligations to their kindred spirits, to their fellow Jews. And they've been given this lie that the Jewish state, that Zionism, is the savior is the savior of the Jewish people. Au contraire, the Zionist state is the greatest threat to the Jewish people in America today.
London, is there another person like you for London, Spain?
In London, there's a 7-7 group. In Spain, not much.
I just have a couple of small, very serious questions. Do you believe that the investigations in 9/11, with the press that we have today in the United States, was actually a free, true press on the investigations?
Was actually what?
A free press on the investigations, or was it just played up? Also, if someone decided to get into politics now, would it be a free voting situation with the press that we have today? That's the second question. The third question is, who do you think is behind setting the elections up if there's not a free press? Because I plan on getting into politics big time after this.
Okay.
Because my life was affected really hard on this one.
Okay.
I gave up my professions because of this, and I'm getting into politics hard.
Okay. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Well, I have a chapter in my book, the little book, about who controls our political system. And that chapter actually goes into great detail about how in Britain, the prime minister candidates are always controlled by a Rothschild-funded Zionist, an Israeli. There was a Lord Cashpoint was one, and then the other guy was Cohen.
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in 30 minutes.
Okay, got it. And so this is how it works in Britain. And in this country, it's very much the same. I'm from Chicago, for example. Barack Obama was a nobody in Chicago, in Illinois, when he was in local government, state government there, and when he was running for office. What happened with Obama is that he found himself running for Senate in a one-man race. The Fitzgerald, I think his name was, the Republican candidate, was forced out of the race for some sort of sexual peccadillo or something. And so it was a one-man race for the U.S. Senate seat from Illinois. And, Ryan, the man's name was Ryan. Fitzgerald was the seat they were going to replace. And so Obama was in a one-man race for the U.S. Senate seat. And that's how it's always been with Obama. Obama has been cultivated and created as a candidate for high office and won his seats in races when he's the only horse running. And the thing is to understand, I've written extensively about Obama in 2008 when he was running. Most important thing to understand is that he was, as soon as he was elected president, the Jewish News of Chicago had him on the front cover, obviously, and they talked about him being America's first Jewish president and things like that, because he was actually created by, as a candidate, by Rahm Emanuel and David Axelrod, who were commissioned to create a presidential candidate out of this man by a woman named Betty Lou Saltzman. And Betty Lou Saltzman is the daughter of Philip Morris Klutznick. Philip Morris Klutznick was the former president of the International Order of B'nai B'rith. B'nai B'rith is a Jewish Zionist secret society in which only men who are Jewish and Zionist can belong. And they have a lot of power in this country. And they meet behind closed doors, and they decide what the Jewish community is going to do, basically. And Betty Lou Saltzman presented Obama in 1992 to her Jewish friends and said that Mr. Obama will be America's first black president. And lo and behold, that's what happened. And Mr. Kletsnik is a billionaire, so that helped a lot. And she used her daddy's money to create this man. And she commissioned in 1992, as I said, David Axelrod and Rahm Emanuel to make Obama a viable presidential candidate. And in 2004, when he won the when he won the Senate seat in 2004, NPR News, which I listened to in the morning in bed, they came on and they said, Obama's won the Senate seat, and what a presidential candidate he is. Or how presidential, and I said, what? The guy won a race in which he was the only candidate, and he's suddenly presidential? But there you see the fix is in. What NPR says, the fix is in.
I long ago discovered there were high powers that be that abuse their powers and cause untold exploitation, destruction, and atrocities. The Zionists are but one. Of course, we know the Illuminati and Bilderberg Group and so forth. Do you see any connections among the operations of some of these shadow organizations in the midst of trying to assume world control and world order?
Thank you, Mark. Could you also clarify the distinguish between the Jewish and Zionist?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. A Jewish person is a person who is ethnically Jewish or religiously Jewish, and they come from all over the world. And a Zionist is a person who believes in the political ideology of Jewish nationalism. Many religious Jews stay away from Zionism because it's a violation of their religious beliefs. When Zionism was first being foisted on the Jewish people in the first part of the 1900s, the majority of Jews were actually anti-Zionist, strongly so. People like Albert Einstein, for example. He was asked to be the first president of the state of Israel. He declined it. He said this is like a Nazi movement. He wanted nothing to do with it. And that's why Zionism actually puts the Jewish people into peril, because it puts them into a position where they have a dual loyalty. And many of these people that are on the screen today that I showed you are dual nationals. Like Michael Chertoff, for example. His mother was a Mossad agent, and he is an Israeli citizen who spent his childhood much of the time in Israel. And then the rest of the question was?
Well, I interrupt.
Other shadow organizations.
Oh yeah. Oh, the whole thing about secret societies. Oh, that's crucial to understanding the whole thing. I just mentioned B'nai B'rith. I mentioned how the Rothschilds, when they wanted to create a political movement for the Jews in Eastern Europe, in order to bring people to their state, their nascent state, they spread Zionism as an ideology through the Jewish communities of Eastern Europe. Then at one point, a very good source book is called the Encyclopedia of Zionism in Israel. It's a 2-volume set published in Israel in 1971. If you read about the history of Zionism from the Zionists themselves, you'll see that the Rothschilds created this movement in order to populate Palestine, which they were creating as and so like the Balfour Declaration that said that the British state looks with good intentions on creating a Jewish homeland in Palestine. That was a letter addressed to Lord Rothschild. Lord Rothschild is the head of the Jewish population of Britain. And this thing about secret societies is very crucial. You'll see pictures of, for example, George Bush, President George Bush, with the Queen of England, and he's doing something like this with his hands, he's making these finger gestures. These secret societies are what link all these characters together. But the thing is, it's like the Russian Madrushka doll again, is that a Jewish Zionist can belong to most secret societies, but only a Jewish Zionist can belong to B'nai B'rith. So when you look at these obituaries from the old times, you'll see some high-level guy in B'nai B'rith, he belonged to a half a dozen other secret societies. So you see, the secret society thing, we're all people, but some people have more influence than others. And if you have an organized group of people within a secret society, their opinion will be the one that prevails. So that you can see that secret societies like Skull and Bones or the Odd Fellows or Rotary Club, these are organizations of men. The men that are most organized behind the doors are the ones who are going to be able to control that organization. You see? So that's how the secret societies are in fact almost all Zionist. You will not find a single secret society which is not Zionist or which is anti-Zionist. So that's, I mean, even the Masons, they have all these lodges, like the Mormons. The Mormons are a heavily Masonic organization. And every, you know, like Joseph Smith, when he was going out west through Illinois and St. Louis and everything, he was spreading Masonic lodges like Johnny Appleseed. Everywhere he went, he created Masonic lodges. So that when they wanted to come down on Professor Jones, for example, President Bush of Skull and Bones went out there and met with the head of the church. And they said, this is what we'll do for Professor Jones. And that's how Professor Jones was basically dealt with.
And that's Professor Stephen Jones, analyzed the thermite.
We got so many new alphabet agencies after 9/11, the TSA, the NSA, Homeland Security. When you realize that this was a false flag operation and that the threat of terror is manufactured, what does it really say about these agencies and what's their true intent?
Oh yeah,
good question.
Very good. Their intent is to create a greater tyranny over the American people. And that's why things like what are happening out there in Oregon are so important. American people are saying the federal government has crossed the line. That the federal government, according to the Constitution, only has property in the 10 square miles of DC. It does not have the right to control 47% of the western states, as it does. 85% of the land of Nevada is under federal control. 85%. 47% of California. And this is across the whole West, it's like this. And these people are saying these federal agencies like BLM, Bureau of Land Management, these alphabet agencies have taken control, have taken liberties and taken power that does not belong to the federal government. So it's like basically they've created a state within a state, where they are taking power wherever they can. And the only thing that I think that can stop it is for the states to regain their sovereignty and for the people to stand up against this tyranny, which is why what's happening in Oregon, for me, is like a good thing. I think it's a good thing that Americans are standing up against the tyranny of the federal government. That's all about control. They want to control us, every aspect of our lives. TSA, I mean, my God, they treat us like we're suspects of a crime. Every time we go to an airport, every time they stop us on the street. You know, it's crazy. We have to stop it. It's overreach, big time.
Quick, Will, and then we got to close. Okay.
In your opinion, is there a candidate worth voting for?
Thank you. I don't live in the United States. I haven't watched the circus as much as many of you probably have. I personally think this is kind of not a very developed opinion, but I think that actually Donald Trump is acting as a wrecker. His position is to wreck the Republican Party, wreck their chances, and to basically give the Democrats the election, give Hillary Clinton. He's making it a lot easier for Hillary Clinton. But at the same time, I see that Trump is very popular, even with a lot of the things he says, he's very popular. So if it were to be a race between Hillary Clinton and Trump might very well win. But I can tell you that the whole thing has gotten so outrageous since the Reagan times. Then we had Bush Jr. That man wasn't presidential. I don't know what y'all think. He was not presidential. And then we had this Obama, and we don't even know where the guy's born. We don't even know the gender of his wife. I mean, there's so many strange things about the Obamas, like I told you. And now they're just making it crazier and crazier. They're trying to make our country just like a lunatic asylum. And they're doing a good job of it. And it's being done by the media. They're trying to demoralize us. They're trying to weaken our republic.
You didn't mention Sanders.
I mean, he's a socialist and perhaps a good candidate, but I don't know. You know, I think that Hillary Clinton is the one to look out for. She's really dangerous.
All right, so if 9/11 is a lie, that means Abu Ghraib was a lie. Gitmo's a lie. All these bombings
May I
are
have your
lies.
attention, please? The library
And
will
it's
be
time to
closing
leave.
in 15 minutes. If you need a library card or any items to be checked out, please come to the circulation desk.
Okay.
So they just keep adding to make 9/11 look like it was true. All this terrorism everywhere, ISIS, all this baloney. I call it Fox News fatigue.
Right.
When are people like us gonna start believing in terrorism? Do you see that happening?
Right. Well, you said about Abu Ghraib and Gitmo. Those are designed to create more terrorism. You see, like Abu Ghraib was meant to rub the face of the Sunni and the Iraqi in the dirt, and more than the dirt, in order to make them mad. Like the guy that's supposedly the caliph of the Islamic State, Baghdadi, he spent 4 years in Camp Bucca. And you see, maybe you've seen some of those photographs from Abu Ghraib. One of the guys that was mishandling those prisoners there had a Star of David tattooed on his arm. So and you have to understand that what the Americans do, what the American military does in the Middle East, they do under the guidance of the Israeli military intelligence. Israeli military intelligence, like I showed you, the chief of staff of Israel was telling, Wolfowitz and these head guys at the Pentagon, basically what they should be doing. They're taking their orders, they're taking their lead, and they're taking the intelligence of Israel and acting on it. So we're being played. America is being treated like a bull with a ring in his nose, and the Israeli is the one who's pulling the ring. And they stomp here, and that's what we're doing. We are destroying the Middle East and countries in the Middle East and lives in the Middle East at the request and at the behest of the Israeli state.
So what you're saying is that terrorism started off as a big lie, 9/11. It's starting to become more and more real.
It's theater. It's all theater. So that a lot of these attacks, most of them are not what they call them to be, but they're staged. They're staged. Whether it's in Nairobi, whether it's in Paris, whether it's in here or there, what? And the whole thing is to create this. We are living through something like the Truman Show, or the movie Brazil, if you will, and we are the audience of this theater, this theater of terror, and it's meant to make us respond in a certain way. And they know if they behead an American, Americans will be incensed and say, "Go get the bastards." You see, It's all meant to create public opinion that we will act then in the way the Israelis find, beneficial for their strategic goals.